Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the El Recreo Wash Process Colombia from Friedhats Coffee. And there's the bottle right there. And let me go ahead and take you around the bottle real quick, as I really like their packaging. It's actually probably my favorite packaging out of any coffee roaster out there in the world. But Friedhats, based out of Amsterdam, Netherlands, and they're a coffee roaster that has appeared on this channel several times before, and they're a coffee roaster that's quite popular with you guys, as they have some of our most viewed videos on this channel. And it's not too surprising to see why, given that their coffee has a very distinct and unique profile to it in general, and I've had mostly positive experiences with their coffees in the past. So anytime I do find their coffee in store, it is something that will at the very least catch my attention, and this coffee right here very much sounds like my flavor profile sort of coffee. So I guess we'll see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 22 of this coffee. The recipe I went with for this coffee was a kind of standard 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, which is a little cooler than typical, but that's the recipe I kept finding for Friedhats coffees, and I did like it at some slightly warmer temperatures too, but 95 degrees Celsius for the most part is what I went with, about 203 degrees Fahrenheit, and I like this one better through the Chemex, which would indicate a more medium grind. Friedhats is a light European for the roast profile. With those things out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 8, first impression. I know, definitely starting this one early, but I was kind of curious, and it had some very vintage Friedhats aspects to it. As I've kind of alluded to in previous Friedhats reviews, that Friedhats has a very distinct and unique profile to it in general, which is this, as I describe it, dark honey base to it. And I'm very curious to see if other people experience this exact same thing, and I've oftentimes wondered what it is about Friedhats coffees, as it's so unique, distinct, and specific to them that I feel like if you gave me 100 different coffees and there was one Friedhats washed processed coffee in that lineup, I'd be able to pick that one out instantaneously, because it's just so distinct for Friedhats coffees. And I assume it's based off of the way they roast their coffee, but I also oftentimes wonder if maybe it's attributed to the packaging that they use. Nonetheless, it's this kind of darker aspect to it. What I describe as a dark honey or a molasses-like taste to this cup of coffee, it was very much present in the first time I tried this coffee. But in addition to that, there was some slight brown candy sweetness, some slight herbality, and even a slight bit of this kind of jammy stone fruit. So it's a nice positive first impression, and we were going to continue from that point, as day 10 ran it through the Chemex, and there's a slight shift in this coffee as I was experiencing much more of that darker aspect to this coffee on this day. A bit of the jammy stone fruit as the cup does cool down, and an ever so slight herbality, which is a very consistent theme throughout this coffee. All three of those factors. So far, positive first impression. First couple impressions anyway. Day 13, notice the most dramatic improvement to the cup of coffee to this point, as another day run through the Chemex, and I was seeing a lot more vibrancy and sweetness to this coffee in general, as it's pretty brown candy forward in the initial stages with this kind of almost molasses-like sweetness. The molasses was really kind of the most key dominant factor I was experiencing on this day, so it was pretty positive to this point. I think I was honestly just wanting a little bit more from this coffee. Day 15, ran it through the V60, and again, that dark aspect of this coffee is just back again. It's just so prominent and pronounced, and it doesn't really leave this coffee. Somewhat a trademark of Friedhats coffees in general, as the listed caramel sweetness, I think it's actually butterscotch that they have on here, at higher temperatures, and there's a slight bit more of this jammy stone fruit, but overall increased vibrancy. I'm definitely seeing incremental improvement in this coffee day by day, so that's another positive thing about it. Not too surprising, very light coffee to begin with, so we were going to see improvements just based off of a little bit more rest. Day 17, getting a bit more from the cup of coffee as it does cool down. It does open up a fair bit as there's some more slight stone fruits, and I was really hoping for, I think, more peachiness. I think they have peach listed on here. Yeah, peach. I was really hoping for so much more of that, and I would never describe this coffee as a very peachy coffee. Even the stone fruit that I was experiencing didn't necessarily lend itself to a more peachy aspect, so that was another slight bit of a letdown to this cup of coffee, but nonetheless, I was getting a little bit more of it on this day. Still plenty of that kind of darker sweetness and distinct herbality that I had kind of alluded to earlier in the coffee. Day 18, haven't seen much of a shift from this coffee in the last couple of days, so there was slight improvements, but then the improvements in general kind of slowed down. Pretty clean, oftentimes feels quite bright with a lingering honeyed finish. All of the listed notes are there, but in a more subtle sense. So hibiscus, butterscotch, peach. Peach, again, kind of more of a stone fruit for me, but they're all a little bit more toned down. They're there, subtle, not the most pronounced prominent things in this coffee. Day 21, even by the end, saying just incremental improvements to this cup of coffee, as the overall sweetness to the cup of coffee is slowly increasing, and there's still plenty of that darker component that I've just been talking about nonstop throughout this coffee. Slight bit of this lasting herbality, and the cup is bright and still moderately delicate. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And just 2 level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. The cleanliness and the acidity. A very clean cup of coffee, and it's not too surprising, especially for everything that's attributed to this coffee, the roaster, the roast profile, and the type of coffee it is. So level 4 is about perfect, and then the acidity at level 4, I think lowering the temperatures does help, so it's actually on the lower side of that level 4, and I remember kind of waffling when I was making this tasting wheel where I wanted to put the acidity, so higher side of level 3, lower side of level 4. I think I just really wanted that highlighted because the sweetness remains at a level 3. No matter how much I worked through this coffee, I could never really get a huge amount of sweetness from this cup of coffee. Best I could say is a higher side of level 3, but 3 seems about perfect for this coffee. Finish, level 3 doesn't have the most lasting finish, which is fine by me. I don't need a really strong lasting finish. Slight bit of saltiness, yeah, fair bit of chocolate. Yeah, it's that kind of delicate craft chocolate bar that I discuss with so many really light coffees in general. That's definitely there in this cup of coffee. Stone fruit, level 3. I know that's generous. It's probably on the lower side of the level 3, higher side of level 2. And florality, yeah, there's a fair bit of florality. It's actually quite nice. It's probably my favorite aspect of this coffee. Body, it would actually be lower through the Chemex, probably level 2, but here, body level 3. I wonder if this was made through the V60, which would make a lot of sense because it was a little less sweet through the V60 as well. Anything else really worth noting? For the most part, I just kind of really agree with this tasting wheel. The coffee, for the most part, was pretty moderate in general. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. So this one, I think, was a little bit of a victim of expectations because this one sounded extremely similar to the types of coffee I've loved in the past. So peach, butterscotch, and hibiscus, those are all flavor notes that I tend to really enjoy in coffee, peach most notably. And the fact that I was never able to get too much peachiness from it, too much sweetness from it. And I always say probably a prerequisite to me really liking a cup of coffee is that you must at least hit that level 4 mark in terms of sweetness. And this one wasn't the sweetest cup of coffee in general, so I think it was just kind of a victim of some really high expectations that I had for it in general. But in that sense, it's still been pretty consistent with what I've had from most Friedhats coffees, as most Friedhats coffees kind of look pretty similar to this tasting wheel that I have here. They're not the most vibrant, they're not the most out there wild cups of coffee in general. They're kind of a little bit more safe, as this is a pretty safe coffee in general. I was never going to dislike this coffee and I was never going to love this coffee. I was always just going to kind of remain in that middle ground where I thought it was a really nice, well done cup of coffee in general, but nothing that I would just rave about endlessly. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you really like Friedhats coffees because of that distinct profile that they have, I think this one's a pretty nice fit for you because I was able to get some additional factors from it. There was that slight bit of stone fruit that I was experiencing, most distinctly a nice bit of herbality. That was probably the best part of this coffee for me. And as a result, it lent itself to being a pretty decent cup of coffee in general. I mean, I have no complaints about it, and that's been kind of my experience with Friedhats. No real complaints about it, if maybe just a slight bit underwhelming, but still a quality cup of coffee in general. So for the most part, I think I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. As well as if you actually get the same sort of thing that I experienced from Friedhats coffees, because I keep wondering if it's me or if others experience that same sort of darker aspect to these coffees. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the El Recreo wash processed Colombia from Friedhats Coffee. Thank you for watching.